The rope snapped. Gasps tore through the night air. For a split second, the wooden platform tilted, and everyone thought he was about to fall. Children screamed. Old men stood up from their charpoys. Lanterns flickered wildly in the wind. And in the middle of it all, Rahim didn't move. He just stood there, barefoot, shirt torn, hands steady on the bamboo poles he had tied together himself. The river below roared like it had been waiting for this moment. One more crack echoed. Someone shouted, "He's gone mad. He'll drown us all." But Rahim's eyes were not afraid. They were burning. On the far side of the river, the headman's tractor headlights cut through the darkness, trying to expose him, trying to stop him. Rahim pulled one final knot tight. The entire structure groaned. And then, the first cart rolled forward. Silence swallowed the village. If this worked, everything would change. If it failed, he would be remembered as the fool who destroyed what little they had. So why was the poorest man in the village the only one bold enough to risk it all? This all started on a quiet summer afternoon when the river was low and harmless. Back then, no one was shouting. No lanterns were swinging in panic. Life moved slowly, like it always had in Basti-Nur, a small village tucked between mustard fields and a stubborn river that cut it off from the main road. Rahim's house stood at the very edge of the village, a mud brick structure with a tin roof that rattled during storms. He lived there with his widowed mother Salma. They owned no land, no cattle, not even a proper well. Rahim worked wherever he could, harvesting wheat, unloading grain sacks, fixing broken fences for a few rupees. He was known as quiet, respectful, poor, very poor. Every morning before sunrise, he would sit near the river with an old notebook someone had thrown away from the city school. He would sketch things, lines, shapes, strange designs no one understood. The children laughed at him. Building a palace, Rahim? They would tease. He would just smile. The truth was simpler. Every monsoon, the river swelled and cut the village off from the market town across it. Crops rotted before they could be sold. Pregnant women were carried on charpoys through waist-deep water. Once, an old man died because they couldn't get him to a doctor in time. And every year, the headman, Haji Karim, promised the same thing. A proper bridge will come. The government has approved it. The bridge never came. Instead, a wooden boat operated by Karim's cousin charged high fees to carry people across when the water rose. If you couldn't pay, you waited, sometimes for days. Rahim had watched his mother cough through fever. One rainy season, while they waited for the boatman to agree to take them on credit, he never forgot that feeling. Helplessness wrapped in muddy water and indifference. Still, life went on. Evenings were warm. Women baked rotis over clay stoves. Children chased goats through narrow alleys. Men gathered under the banyan tree to drink tea and argue about politics they barely understood. Rahim rarely spoke during those gatherings, but he listened. He listened when farmers complained about losing half their harvest to middlemen. He listened when young boys said they would leave for the city because there was nothing here. He listened when Karim dismissed every suggestion with a wave of his hand. "It's not so simple," the headman would say. "These things cost money. Money." Rahim had none, but he had been watching the river for years, watching how it narrowed at one bend, watching how fallen trees sometimes held against the current, watching how bamboo from the northern fields grew tall and strong. One evening, after another meeting ended in complaints and empty promises, Rahim didn't go home. He walked along the riverbank instead. And for the first time, he didn't just look at the water. He measured it, with his steps, with his eyes, with something bigger forming quietly inside his mind. No one noticed that night, but something had shifted, and once Rahim started thinking, he couldn't stop. At first, it was only whispers. Rahim began collecting discarded bamboo from the northern fields. broken poles, half-cracked logs, pieces farmers had thrown aside. He stacked them behind his house carefully, tying them with old rope he bought on credit. People noticed. "What are you building?" his neighbor asked casually. "Nothing yet," Rahim replied. But his notebook filled quickly now. Measurements, angles, rough drawings of platforms tied together in rows. He tested knots for hours, pulling them tight until his palms burned. At night, he walked to the narrow bend in the river and stood there listening to the current. Then came the first incident. One afternoon, a farmer named Bashir slipped while crossing in knee-deep water. Haji Karim sipped his tea slowly. "These are government matters. Leave them to those who understand." Rahim felt the heat rise in his chest, but he said nothing more. The second incident hit harder. A cart full of tomatoes waited 3 days to cross because the boatman refused credit. By the time it reached the market, half the produce had spoiled. The farmer wept openly in front of everyone. That night, Rahim went house to house, not asking for money, asking for bamboo. Most doors closed politely. A few gave him a pole or two out of pity. Within a week, a rough pile formed near the river bend. That's when Karim intervened. "You're creating danger," the headman said publicly. "If someone gets hurt, it will be your responsibility." Rahim kept working. Rumors spread. He wants to embarrass the headman. He thinks he's smarter than everyone. He's risking lives. Salma begged him to stop. "We are already poor," she said softly. "Don't make enemies." Rahim looked at her tired hands. "Ami, what if we don't have to beg every monsoon?" The third incident changed everything. Heavy rains arrived early. The river swelled faster than expected. By evening, it was impossible to cross without the boat. But the boatman had left to visit relatives in another town. Panic crept in quietly. A pregnant woman went into labor that night. Men ran along the riverbank shouting helplessly into the dark. Rahim didn't wait. He dragged the largest bamboo sections he had tied together over the past weeks. He anchored them with double knots, driving wooden stakes deep into the mud. The structure wasn't perfect. It wasn't pretty, but it floated. People hesitated. What if it collapses? Someone whispered. The woman screamed again from her house. Rahim stepped onto the platform first. It dipped. It swayed, but it held. He extended his hand, one at a time. The crossing took 20 terrifying minutes. The platform groaned under weight. Water splashed over the edges, but they made it. By dawn, the woman had reached the clinic across the river. She survived. The baby survived. The village buzzed with uneasy gratitude. But Karim's face hardened. "You acted without permission," he said coldly. If something had happened, who would answer? Rahim met his gaze steadily. Something did happen, and we answered. From that day, the divide was clear. Half the village began quietly supporting Rahim, offering more bamboo, stronger rope. The other half warned him to back down, and the river kept rising. The temporary crossing grew longer, stronger, and more dangerous. By the time monsoon peaked, Rahim had tied together the largest structure he had ever attempted. Wide enough for a bullock cart. No one had tested it. Not with full weight, not with the entire village watching. Which is why, on that stormy night when the rope snapped, Everyone held their breath, because there was no turning back now. And in that moment, under storm clouds and stunned faces, the truth hit harder than the river's current. The poorest man in the village had just built what promises never did. No one cheered at first. They just stared. The rain softened into a steady drizzle, tapping against bamboo and tin roofs, as if the storm itself was calming down to witness what had happened. Rahim slowly unwrapped the rope from his arm. The skin was raw, bleeding in thin lines, but he didn't seem to feel it. Across the river, the farmer stood up and raised both hands. "It held," he shouted. That was all it took. Murmurs turned into voices. Voices into cheers. Not loud, not wild, but deep, relieved, real. Men who had mocked him stepped onto the platform cautiously. It swayed, but it held. One by one, they crossed. Then, two at a time. By midnight, 3 carts had passed safely. Haji Karim said nothing. He watched from under his umbrella, water dripping from its edges, his authority washing away with the rain. For years, he had controlled the crossing, controlled who moved and who waited. And tonight, that control had slipped from his hands without a single vote or speech. The next morning, something subtle had changed. Women crossed freely with baskets of vegetables. Children ran across laughing, treating it like an adventure. Farmers moved their produce early, reaching the market before spoilage could claim it. The boatman returned 2 days later. He stood by his tied boat, staring at the bamboo crossing in disbelief. No one lined up for him anymore. Whispers spread beyond Basti Noor. Nearby villages heard of the floating bridge. Some came just to see it. A few even offered to help strengthen it. Rahim didn't act proud. He reinforced weak joints, replaced damaged poles, adjusted anchors as the river shifted. He worked quietly, like he always had. But this time, he wasn't alone. Young boys carried bamboo for him. Older men tied knots under his direction. Even those who once laughed now followed his instructions carefully. Haji Karim finally called for a gathering under the banyan tree. He cleared his throat, voice stiff. "This structure must be made safer. We will form a committee." A few men exchanged glances. For the first time, someone spoke before Karim finished. "Rahim should lead it," Bashir said firmly. There was no argument. The decision didn't come through shouting. It came through simple nods. Karim's jaw tightened, but he saw it. The shift in eyes. The change in loyalty. Power had moved, not by force, not by politics, but by courage. That monsoon passed with fewer losses than any year before. No crops rotted waiting for a boat. No sick person was stranded. No one drowned attempting a desperate crossing. And each time someone stepped onto the bamboo path, they remembered the night it almost collapsed. And didn't. Rahim still lived in the same mud brick house. Still wore worn-out sandals. But when people spoke his name now, they did it differently. Not with pity, with respect. Because the river was still dangerous. The storms still came. But something stronger had been built in Basti Noor. Belief. And it floated. By the time the next dry season arrived, the government officials finally visited Basti Noor. They came in pressed clothes and polished shoes, carrying clipboards and questions. They measured the river, took photographs of the bamboo crossing, wrote notes. But what surprised them most wasn't the structure. It was the people. They spoke with one voice. "We built this," they said. Not he, not the headman. We? Haji Karim still held his title, but it no longer carried fear. He had learned to listen. Sometimes painfully, sometimes quietly. And Rahim? He never left the village for fame or money. When asked how he managed to build what others couldn't, he simply said, the river was never the biggest problem. Thinking small was. Years later, when a permanent concrete bridge finally stood over the water, children still pointed to the bend where the bamboo once floated. That's where it began, they would say, not the bridge, but the courage to imagine one. Because the poorest man in the village had never been poor in vision, and that changed everything.